This week on the show, we are going to look at FreeBSD 11.1 Beta 1, since that release is out now, and we discuss kernel address randomized link, or KARL, which is an interesting mitigation technique. And we also explore the benefits of daily OpenBSD source code reading in this newest episode of BSD Now. BSD Now, episode 199, Read the Source, KARL, recorded on the 21st of June, 2017. Hi, I'm your host, Benedikt Reuschling.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And we have a great episode prepared for you with a lot of content, so we should get right into it. The headlines for this week, the first one is FreeBSD 11.1 Beta 1 is available.
And I think by the time you watch this, Beta 2 will be out even, and that'll have a change log between 1 and 2, although it should be relatively minor. I don't know that people have found many problems with 11.1 Beta 1 yet, but we very much encourage you to download it and give it a try and find any of the problems so they can be fixed before the release.
Yep, and they're building many different versions of that for many different architectures and embedded systems. So what do we have in the list?
So there's the regular AMD 64 and i386, PowerPC and PowerPC 64, Spark 64, ARch 64, which is ARM 64, and then for ARM v6, there's the Banana Pi, BeagleBone, QB Board 2, QBox Hummingboard, Gumsticks, Raspberry Pi B, Raspberry Pi 2, Panda Board, and Wand Board that all have specialized images. Mm-hmm. And in particular for all of the ARM v6 images, for the convenience, since those are images you write to an SD card and put in the device rather than running in the installer, especially if you don't have the console set up, you can SSH into those ones. They have a default user called FreeBSD with the password of FreeBSD and root with the password of root. So you'll be able to SSH in and change those passwords right away.
Mm-hmm. They're also listing that they have virtual machine disk images and also listing the partition layout. So we have a 16 kilobyte FreeBSD boot GPT partition type, a 1 gigabyte swap GPT partition type, and a 20 gigabytes FreeBSD UFS GPT partition type in those.
Right, and it's laid out that way so that if the virtual machine disk you put this image into, you can grow it to whatever size, and it'll run the growfs command and automatically expand into the size so that you can easily turn it into a much larger virtual machine. Mm-hmm. And that's available as QCOW2 for things like QEMU and KVM, VHD that's the VirtualBox and so on, or is that the Microsoft one? I think it's the Microsoft one. And then VMDK, which is VMware and VirtualBox.
Yep, and the raw formats as well, which is
this
also
is a raw one for Beehive.
Last resort, if everything else fails. We mentioned
if you're going to run the ARM64 in a virtual machine, you need a modified QEMU EFI loader file, and that's provided with instructions on the wiki there as well.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And
all of the Amazon EC2 images are available. There are Vagrant scripts ready to go, and you can upgrade an existing install to it using the commands and the instructions here.
Mm-hmm.
And then
lot of choice.
The SHA-256 of all the ISO images is provided in this cryptographically signed email.
Mm-hmm. So that's a way to validate those downloaded releases. Mm-hmm. And there's also the full schedule on our show notes. So for 11.1 release, they expect the release to be at the end of July this year, a little more or a little less, depending on how many bugs were found during the release cycle. So people should try out these beta images and test and report bugs they might find.
Yes, We really like people to run through that and find any problems that there might be and report them, so they can all be fixed. And they, we don't end up not finding them until a month from now when we're trying to actually do the release.
Speaking of release, it was also announced that there will be a 10.4 release scheduled for October. So that's another branch of the 10 release.
Yep. So if you're on 10.3 and want to be able to do a smaller in-place upgrade instead of the bigger one, with maintain the binary compatibility, there will be a 10.4 that will enter code slush at the end of July, basically, as 11.1 is finished. We'll start working on 10.4, and then it'll code freeze starting in August, and its release is scheduled for the beginning of October.
Okay, so a lot of new releases coming up, and people should test and report anything they should find, or they will find.
Yeah, so if there's anything broken in 10 that you would like to see fixed, hurry up with that.
Yep. Okay, our next story is KARL, which stands for Kernel Address Randomized Link, and it's been posted to the OpenBSD tech mailing list. So what's this all about?
Yeah, so Theo has a post here on the OpenBSD tech mailing list saying, over the last 3 weeks, he's been working on a new randomization feature that will protect the kernel. The situation today is that many people install a kernel binary from OpenBSD and they run that same kernel binary for 6 months. We have substantial randomization for the memory allocations made in the kernel and for userland, of course, but the kernel is always in the same place in the kernel virtual address space. So they took a few steps to improve this. So they moved all of their kernels to a new mapping model, and they had help from Patrick and Visa at openbsd.org to get some of the other platforms going. Previously, the kernel assembly language bootstrap runtime, or locor.s, was compiled and linked with all the other C files in the kernel into a deterministic result. Locor.o was always the first file, and then the C files in the order specified by the config utility. In the new world order, the locor is split into two files. One chunk is the bootstrap, which has to stay the same, and that runs at the beginning. But the assembly language runtime and all the other files are linked in a random fashion. There are some other pieces to try to improve the randomness of the layout as well. As a result, every new kernel is now unique because they randomize the order that everything gets set up in. And the relative offsets between the functions and the data are also unique. It still loads at the same location in the kernel virtual address space, so it's not kernel ASLR. ASLR is a concept where the base address of the module is based on a random location. So there's a chunk of code that is still well known, and it has a well-known address, the bootstrap. Once the kernel gets up and running, it blasts that bootstrap code into oblivion by smashing it with trap instructions or by unmapping that bit of memory.
Sounds cool.
Depending on the architecture. So, of course, if you booted the same kernel binary repeatedly, the layout would be the same. And that's where they are today. And this extra bit of code. So now, starting with snapshots of -current, Robert Pescherer, I don't know, RPE at openbsd.org. The change is scaffolding to ensure you boot a newly linked kernel upon every reboot. The base set now contains a link kit of the original .o files from the compile directory of the kernel, so that a new random kernel can be linked together. So as you boot up each time, you relink the kernel and write it to disk so that the next time you reboot, it'll be different. So as part of each boot, you make a new random kernel to use next time.
Interesting concept.
It says on a fast machine, this takes less than about a second, and a mail is sent to the system administrator. When a reboot runs, that new kernel boots and then randomizes yet another one.
Okay, a lot of randomization going on.
Yep. They say this mechanism is currently incompatible with the unhibernate command, the hibernate to disk, or suspend to disk. But they're working on a solution for that. Obviously, you can't load the old memory back into the place if you're booting a different kernel the second time. So they say if you're using OpenBSD-current, the hibernate function will not work. And you can disable the randomizing mechanism by putting no in this specific files that they list in the announcement, if you like the hibernate feature.
Yeah, it's either security or unhibernation at the current state.
For now, until they get it sorted out.
And they close with, our immune systems work better when they are unique. Otherwise, one airline passenger from Singapore with a new flu could wipe out Europe. They should fly to Washington instead. They add to that one. Our computers should be more immune. Okay, that's a statement.
Yeah.
So yeah, people should try this out on OpenBSD and see how they get the new randomizations going on and whether it's improving the security even further.
Cool. So you want to tell us about the next story?
Yeah, the next story is LLDB sanitizing the debugger's runtime, and it's been posted on the NetBSD project's blog. Starting with that, basically they listed good and less good parts, so they start with the good. They write this month, Kamil Karofsky, he started to work on correcting the ptrace layer as test suite used to trigger failures on the kernel side. This finally ended up sanitizing the LLDB runtime as well, addressing LLDB and NetBSD userland bugs. It turned out that more bugs were unveiled, and this is not the final report on LLDB, but it starts with the good. So besides the greater enhancements this month, I performed the cleanup of the ATF ptrace tests again. Additionally, I have managed to unbreak the LLDB debug build and to eliminate compiler warnings in the NetBSD native process plugin. It is worth noting that LLVM can run tests on NetBSD again. The path in gtest/LLVM has been installed by Jörg Sonnenberg, and more generic one has been submitted to the upstream Google test repository. There's also an improvement in ftruncate on the LLVM side, authored by Jörg as well. Since LLD, the LLVM linker, is advancing rapidly and improved support for NetBSD and can link functional executable on NetBSD. I submitted a patch to stop crashing it on startup anymore. It was nearly used for linking LLDB, NetBSD, and it spotted a real linking error. However, there are further issues that need to be addressed in the future. Currently, LLD is part of the mainline LLDB tasks. It's time to improving the work environment. The linker should reduce the linking time compared to GNU linkers, the LLDB by a factor of 3 to 10 times, and save previous developer time. Wow. As of now, LLDB linking can take minutes of a modern AMD 64 machine designed for performance. That sounds good.
In Ed's FreeBSD toolchain talk at BSDCan, there was some pretty impressive graphs of what LLD can do compared to other stuff.
It continues with kernel correctness. I have researched in package source WIP initial support for multiple threads in the NetBSD native process plugin. This code revealed, when running the LLDB regression test suite, new kernel bugs. This unfortunately affects the usability of a debugger in a multi-thread environment in general and explains why GDB was never doing its job properly in such circumstances. One of the first errors was asserting kernel panic with pt_ asterisk step when a debuggy was more than a single thread. I have narrowed it down to log primitives misuse in the do_ptrace kernel code. The fix has been committed as well. Now it continues with the bad. Will you take that one? The bad parts?
Sure. Sorry. Unfortunately, it's not the full story. There's still a bunch more work they have to do, in particular about the LLDB acceleration. Apparently, there's a bug in the EV_set that is broken upstream over a month ago, and during the period the debugger was significantly accelerated and parallelized. It is difficult to declare it definitively, but it might be a reason why the tracer's runtime broke due to the threads getting desynchronized. They say LLDB behaves differently when run standalone versus under ktrace or under GDB. The shared bug is that it always fails in one way or another, which isn't trivial to debug. How do you debug your debugger?
Yeah, it's difficult. Maybe dtrace can help.
And then they have the ugly, and there's also unpleasant issues in the core of the operating system. There's some troubles in the NetBSD kernel. Another bug with single-step functions that affect other aspects of correctness, this time with reliable execution of a program, is that the processes die in non-deterministic ways when single-stepped. My current impression is that there is no appropriate translation between processes and the thread states under a debugger. These issues are sibling problems to unreliable pt-resume and pt-suspend commands. In order to be able to appropriately address this, I have diligently studied the Solaris internals book to get a better image of the design of the NetBSD kernel multiprocessing, which is modeled after Solaris's commercial Unix. They say the current trouble can be summarized as data races in the kernel, and at the same time in LLDB. I can decide to port the LLDB sanitizers as I require the thread sanitizer, tsan. Temporarily, I have removed the code from tracing processes with multiple threads to hide the known kernel bugs and focused on the LLDB races. Unfortunately, LLDB is not easily bisectable. Build time on the LLVM plus Clang plus LLDB stack and some number of revisions. Therefore, the debugging has to be performed on the most recent code from upstream's trunk. And I note that this work is sponsored by the NetBSD Foundation, and if you'd like to see more of it, please chip in whenever you can.
Yeah, I guess they will upstream all those fixes, and LLDB will improve, and all the downstream consumers will benefit from those fixes as well. That's very nice. Good progress on many different areas.
This week's episode of BSD Now is brought to you by DigitalOcean. If you go over to DigitalOcean, you can sign up and get a virtual machine running FreeBSD 10, 3, or 11, or a selection of other operating systems of your choice for as little as $5 a month. And if you use the coupon code FreeBSD Now, you will get an additional $10 credit added to your account so that you can keep that machine running for 2 months or get a bigger one. Or if you're using hourly pricing, you can play with it just on weekends for quite a while.
Yeah, and you only get charged for the time that you're using that one. And if you want to see what your droplet is doing, they have comprehensive monitoring solutions in place, so you can see what your droplet is doing by watching the CPU usage, disk I/O, memory, disk usage, bandwidth, and top processes in a little, or not so little, graphs that will plot all the things that are going on in your little droplet.
Yeah, in addition to the compute, they also have storage, so you can get separate block storage you can run ZFS on. They have networking options, including private networking and the elastic IP addresses, which allow you to, they're floating IP addresses that allow you to have one IP address that can move back and forth between a couple different VMs so that you can have, the primary and the backup for your website, or pre and post upgrade of your website, and you can bounce it back and forth depending on if the new one's not working, you can fall back to the old one, and then you can try the new one again and then push it forward and so on. And they have a load balancer, they have new monitoring stuff, and a new firewall.
Yeah, that's great.
One of the most useful features is they support teams, so you can delegate access to parts of your account so that, someone who's helping you with your project or whatever can access the VMs and create new ones and so on, but doesn't have access to your billing information.
And you can also create little notifications that set up a little alert that notify you either via email or by Slack, and that's all configured via OAuth, so you can reuse your credentials that you already have somewhere else.
Yep, so head over to digitalocean.com and check it out, and don't forget to use the coupon code FreeBSD Now. So our next story is some OpenBSD hackathon reports from their hackathon in
Starnberg, I guess, in Germany. So the first one is from Ken Westerbeck, and the listing or the article on undeadly.org is titled From the Sequential Improvement Department. He writes, our second D2K17 report from Ken is the following. I arrived in Starnberg with a clear and overriding focus to finally expunge the obsolete XS_no_CCB construct from our SCSI code. In fact, I was so focused on this issue, I walked right past my pre-D2K17 hotel and wandered the streets of Starnberg for 30 minutes until I found it sitting right across the street from the Bahnhof where I stared at. So he pretty much was so immersed already that he missed his hotel. That's dedication, I would say. Once he got to the hack room the next day and established communications with SF at OpenBSD, he quickly got the VOBLK, VIOS SCSI, and SCSI XS_no_CCB removal code tested and committed. Over the next few days, despite repeated interruptions described below, that one stayed out of the tree, and a number of associated cleanups and code simplifications were committed by SF, M. Larkin, and himself. So what's about the distractions? What's that all about? It's further down the article. If you want to find out, read it and see for yourself.
Yeah, he says, in the middle of this important work, Henning tapped me on the shoulder and complained that DH Client was abusing his specialized VLAN plus static route setup. DH Client was starting up, then noticing that the VLAN device had a new link local address and immediately restarting, which meant that the not route statement in his hostname.vlanxx file was being executed before the interface had a lease in place, which was bad. I admitted there had been a change in DH Client to get the LL address earlier, but didn't understand how this could possibly impact the setup. As it turns out, VLAN devices were not inheriting their link local address at creation time, among other possible milestones that might impact the link local address. After some back and forth discussion among MPI, DLG, and himself, a change was committed to ensure that VLAN interfaces get a valid link local address under most conceivable circumstances, and so the problem was solved. Well, not quite. Unfortunately, even with a valid link local address, the VLAN interface was misbehaving on startup. When the parent interface did not have a link, i.e. in the weird interface, or if a wired interface was unplugged, more poking showed that the VLAN did not implement the SIO CG if media ioctl. So DH Client assumed the VLAN link was up and immediately started pumping out packets that went nowhere. MPI put together a diff that implemented the CG config if media by passing such requests to the parent interface, and problem solved. Well, not quite. You can see where this is going.
A running gag.
In putting together the diff, MPI spotted that the incredibly old and crufty way DH Client detected link state. He recommended using the new getIfAdder information instead, which I happily committed as a simplified the code and luckily simplified future pledge work. Problem solved. Well, people immediately noticed that the new DH Client link detection was bogus for Wi-Fi interfaces. This resulted in some soul encode searching that revealed that Wi-Fi interfaces were not setting the link local or link state to link down when it was appropriate to do so. Instead, they left the link state to link unknown, which DH Client has to interpret as link might be up. STSP quickly fixed this by having Wi-Fi interfaces set link state appropriately, and problem solved.
Silence.
Actually.
Yay! Yeah, they fixed that one. Yeah, sometimes you throw a stone in the source tree and many other building blocks fall over and you need to solve those as well. Yeah, so it's an excellent report. And we have another one by Antoine Chacutot on rc.d, syspatch, and more. And he writes, after 5 hours of hellish train ride, I have come to Starnberg with only one goal, to fix rc.d. But to do that, I can't be the OpenBSD developer I once was. To honor System D's memory, I must be someone else. I must be something else. So he started his work on rc.d. It's disturbing yet amazing that after 7 years, I still enjoy a lot of working on the shell-based framework. While hackathons are great for many things, What I like the most about them is that they empower people to start and or finalize tricky projects. The small rc.d bit that I committed there was the actual result of 2 previous hackathons. It all started in Cambridge, UK, went to Brisbane, and ended up in Starnberg. While the diff is small, it is the result of a few ping-pong brain games between the fellow developers and himself. It did 2 things. Introduce a background timer so that a fucked up process or misconfigured daemon cannot hang the boot process. And we can now display a timeout marker when such a process reaches daemon_timeout. A daemon that is not able to background itself, thank you systemd for encouraging that stupid trend by the way, and must use shell cron jobs now, will now return a proper error code if it fails. Nothing shabby, but well, shell sucks. Oh, but I love shell. Drink the Cornate. Oh well, shell is hard, let's go shopping. Thank whatever deity it is you're thanking. I can now concentrate on syspatch. Yay! Good thing it's not shell again. Wait, and people wonder why we consume so many beers during hackathons? Anyway, I had a small to-do list to enhance the new hipster tool. Output is now much better when running from cron, because we all know, well, unattended upgrades work. And because I'm into fashion computing, I made it more tolerant against small /GMP partitions so that my AWS instances could actually benefit from binary patching. Then, of course, because I love pain at least as much as I love shell, I crawled into my lovely ports tree and did some terrible things like the following. Updating stuff, including a major update to Cirrus IMAPD to version 3.0.1, fixing stuff, like fixing the output of HashiCorp Vault version, cleaning and reviewing stuff, hello maidesktop.org, laundering stuff, define hmac_update to NSS_hmac_update in Mozilla NSS to prevent a clashing symbol with libcrypto. And last, messaging rc.d scripts after my rampage on rc.subber. As usually, had a lot of fun, thanks to the OpenBSD gang, the OpenBSD Foundation, Genoa GmbH, and the girl who yelled at MPI after he watered her at the lake. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, hackathons are fun.
Then we got one from Florian Obser. He said, I wanted to take an overnight train from Amsterdam to Munich, but the service had been cancelled sometime last year, so I had to fly to not lose so much time. For Munich airport, I took the S-Bahn and had to switch in Passing. He met up with Sebastian Benoit, and then arrived with an ICE at the same station and commented that he would take the S-Bahn 20 minutes after mine. So I asked him if I should wait for him, and he said, no need, the Deutsche Bahn just doesn't know how fast I can run. I will probably be on your S-Bahn. And indeed, the ICE came in, Benno walked up the stairs to the platform at a leisurely pace, and we still had to wait 5 more minutes.
Oh yes, so typical.
The second part of the S-Bahn ride was uneventful, and after arriving in Sternberg station, I did some shopping. Benno searched for an ATM. It turns out Google Maps was wrong about where that was. And then we started going through Sternberg and Socking and went to the hacking room.
Mm-hmm. Oh, nice. But the next one is by this time I was getting a bit hungry. I only had breakfast and second breakfast that day and had already missed 11s. Luckily, we arrived on time for lunch, and there is a little lunch menu here posted in Germany listing that the breakfast will be from 8 to 9. A little snack is from 9:30 to 12. Lunch is from 1 when the bell rings. Coffee and cake is from 2:30 to 5. Yeah, and the dinner is from 1900 hours when the second bell rings. Okay. Yeah, that's typical lunch times, I guess, for the region.
He talked a bit about working on SLAACD, SLAACD, which is a stateless auto configuration for IPv6. He's found Alexander Bloom had fixed a syslog severity issue in their log.c logger throughout the tree. We have a second set of loggers. I like to call them the DLG style loggers, since as far as I know, David Gwynn introduced them. They're quite nice for simple priv drop daemons that only consist of one C file and are currently shared with identd, slow CGI, TFTP proxy, and TFTPD. I quickly synced their severity to the log.c version. And then it had been pointed out on the tech list that the Acme client sometimes output double slashes as path separators. Turned out that the intention was to use base name, but due to brain fart, the function had been hand rolled. Tossing in the real deal fixed the double slash problem. Then later, while showering the next morning, it hit him that to move forward with slackd, at this point, he'd probably best to explain a bit what slackd is supposed to solve. This is Hegel remarked somewhere that all great world historic facts appear, so to speak, twice. I'm well aware that they appear the first time as tragedy and the second time as farce. Back at the hackathon in 2014 in Ljubljana, I had ripped out RT sold, which is the router solicitation daemon, and moved sending the router solicitation into the kernel. This time around, I ripped it out of the kernel again and then some. Processing of router advertisements can go too. Since some time now, the team of network hackers is busy moving the network stack out from under the kernel lock. Having less code in the kernel makes that work easier. Also, the code in NetInet 6 is not exactly pretty and does not hold up to the current coding standards. So slackcd follows the well-established pattern of pledged and privstep daemons in OpenBSD. It processes router advertisements to configure IPv6 addresses and default routes, sends solicitations when needed, and keeps track of system state changes, like interfaces going up or down. Another thing slackcd is supposed to solve is to speak to a yet to be fully designed and written network configuration policy daemon. The idea was that we would have all these disconnected sources of information about how we could reach the internet. There's IPv4 DHCP, IPv6 auto configuration, USB mobile broadband, and maybe in the future a DHCP v6, etc. We get addresses or prefixes to generate addresses, default routes, and sometimes recursive resolvers. These pieces might also show up on multiple interfaces, wired, Wi-Fi, and mobile broadband. It's a policy decision which interfaces and addresses to choose at any given time. It'd be nice if it happened automatically. So he was working on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very long report, and there's also a couple of pictures in there. So they enjoyed their time with barbecue and coding, of course, and a lot of stuff happening as well. Mm-hmm. We have yet another report from the hackathon. It's from Stefan Sperling. And he writes, this hackathon, I took time to kick off a project I've been wanting to try for some time, but never got around to. Adding sound support for my laptop, which uses an internal USB audio device wired to XHCI. Our XHCI driver lacks support for data transfers with guaranteed bandwidth and timing constraints, aka isochronous transfers. The first step is to add support for such transfers. MPI at OpenBSD tells me the rabbit hole ends up in U audio, but I'll worry about that later. To get started, I spent some time reading parts of the USB 2.0 and USB 3.1 specs, as well as Intel's datasheet for the XHC interface. We have a link to the Wikipedia article for that. Equipped with this new knowledge, I started brushing up on old work-in-progress diff that MPI shared with me. I did not make much progress and eventually got sidetracked into the wireless stack, but having finally explored this problem space feels good. I will try to keep exploring. And continues to write that back in wireless land, I improved support for access points with disabled 802.11b support to prevent old and slow devices from hogging airtime at the expense of backwards compatibility. Many of our drivers hardcode 11b rates into the hardware when sending broadcast frames, so they won't work in such networks. The IWM and IWN drivers now respect the basic rate set announced by the access point in its beacon and won't send broadcasts and rates not included in this set. The IWM parts of this were implemented by Peter Hessler. Thanks. Many drivers still need to be looked at and fixed, but changes required in each driver are small. If anyone would like to help with this, please talk to me. I also fixed a bug in IWM, which caused fatal firmware errors when the interface was reconfigured several times in quick succession. Meanwhile, KRW is Ken R. Westerbeck, I guess, and MPI, improved DH client's link detection logic, and this exposed an old link state reporting bug in the net 802.11 layer. The link state of a wireless interface was in the unknown state the first time the interface came up after boot. The unknown state caused the DH client to assume the interface was up and to start sending the HCP request package into the void instead of printing its ... sleeping message. Once the interface had successfully associated once and was brought down again, the net 802.11 layer set the link state from up to down, and DH client would behave normally from here on. The fix was simple. Always set the interface link state to down before configuring the interface, regardless of whether the interface was previously associated with an access point or not. And toward the end of the hackathon, he concludes or writes that he added another regularly requested feature. IWN and IWM interface now notice when an access point grows legs and walks out of range. To detect this, the drivers listen to missed beacon events signaled by the hardware. Once a certain number of consecutive beacons were missed, the driver sends a probe request to the access point. If the access point answers with a probe response, the interface stays connected. If no response from the access point is received, the act of sending a probe request triggers a useful side effect. The 802.11 layer automatically puts the interface into scan mode, which initiates a search for a new access point. Oh, great.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good improvement.
Thanks to Undeadly for writing up all these reports of their hackathon.
Mm-hmm. And if we have more from the people that are still writing them, we'll cover that in a future show.
Yep.
Now it's time for our news roundup this week, starting with multi-tenant router or firewall with FreeBSD.
Yes, this one's a very interesting one written up by Olivier
Koshalabe
from the BSD Router project, and it actually shows you how to turn one machine into multiple separate firewalls or routers that allow customers to have root on their own firewall, but not the whole machine.
Oh, interesting.
So you have your router here, and it's connected to the internet, but inside it's got separate VNet jails, firewall 1, firewall 2, and firewall 3. Each of your customers has access to their firewall and can add and remove their own firewall rules or routing rules or run their routing daemon or whatever, but it all runs on one physical router.
Okay. And there are a lot of descriptions and pictures in there. Wow, this is very detailed.
It's all the bits you need to actually build it.
Is there any special setup being done other than the delegation of the privileges itself?
So in general, they show they use a BSD Router project lab script here to spin up a bunch of beehives and configure the network. So they create 5 VMs, each of them with 5 network interfaces. And that's each VM is connected to each other VM directly, and then they have one that's connected to the bridge. And they fire up all the serial consoles. So router 4 hosts the 3 routers and firewalls for each of the 3 customers. Router 1 belongs to customer 1, router 2 to customer 2, and router 3 to customer 3. And then finally you have router 5, which is simulating an internet host on the far side that actually is the thing you're being able to reach. So if you look at the diagram again,
up here,
everything in this square is actually the real router, R4, but we have 3 virtual routers, R1, R2, and R3, and those are each belonging to a customer. And then you have the internet, and on the far side of the internet you have router 5 that's, you're simulating being the entire internet.
Yeah, that's the
so it shows how you configure the regular host, and then walks through configuring each of the customers' machines and setting up the router here with all your different interfaces.
Doing ping tests.
Yep. It's got a new tenant command, and you can just tell it which one goes where, and configure all your jails and set up their firewalls, and you're good to go. And then each customer has access to their firewall, but not other firewalls, and can change their routing and firewalling however they like.
Yep. This might be something for ISPs or people who run big networks and have customers that have more requirements than just running a box or a certain number of machines, but also they want to run their own networking and firewall rules. That's a good setup for them.
Yep, it requires modifying the default devd rules to make devpf available inside the jails so that they can control their firewall, or devbpf if you want them to be able to run TCP dump. They took out the nojail keyword in the pf config file so that it'll start in the jails. He has an example of what the tenant shell script looks like, so you can, if you want to use it on something that's not BSD Writer project, you can do that. They do nullfs based so that the firewalls are read-only inside. And they have their etc and var live on a tempfs disk, which is populated when they start. So it requires that you run the autosave daemon on the BSD Writer project, which will, so the configuration in the jails, when a user makes a change, it gets saved to a RAM disk. And if you don't have the autosave daemon running to copy that to the permanent storage, then when you reboot, their changes will go away.
Mm-hmm. And they provide us examples of the configuration for that as well. So there's a lot of listings in this article, and people are encouraged to try this out or modify it a little bit for their own environments, and they can pretty much rebuild the setup as described in the article.
Yeah, and your customers even get to pick between IPFW and PF. So it's quite a nice setup. Looking forward to some of our viewers trying it out and letting us know how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
And you can set up the whole thing inside on one machine if you just use the lab script provided as well.
Mm. Okay, so thanks Olivier for writing this up. Our next story is very near and dear to my heart because we get a lot of requests at conferences or via email telling us, hey, I want to help out the projects, the BSDs, but I'm not that well versed in the kernel. How do I get started into getting more into the source? And this is a good start that the tintangle.pl blog has up here for you, written by Adam Walk. So he writes, the title is OpenBSD Daily Source Reading. So he writes, I made a New Year's resolution to read at least one C source file from OpenBSD daily. The goal was to both get better at C and to contribute more to the base system and userland development. I have to admit that initially I wasn't consistent with it at all. In the first quarter of the year, I read the code for a few small base utilities and nothing else. Still, every bit counts and it's never too late to get better. Around the end of May, I really started reading code daily. No days skipped. It usually takes anywhere between 10 minutes for small base utilities and 1.5 hours for targeted reads. I'm pretty happy with the results so far. Exploring the system on a daily basis, looking up things in the code that don't understand or that he doesn't understand, and digging as deep as possible made him learn a lot more about C and the system that he initially expected. There's also one more side effect of reading code daily. Diffs. It's easy to spot inconsistencies, outdated code, or an incorrect man page. This results in opportunities for contributing to the project. With time, it also becomes less opportunistic and more goal-oriented. You might start with a drive-by diff to kill, and he links to that patch from the article. That optional compilation of an old compatibility option in change own that has been compiled in by default since 1995. And there's a little tweet linked from here as well. Soon the contributions became more targeted, for example, using a new API for encrypting passwords in the htpasswd utility after reading the code of the utility and the code for htpasswd handling in HTTPD. Similarly, it can take you from discussing a do-as feature idea with a friend to implementing it after reading the code. I was having a lot of fun reading code daily and started recommending it to people in general discussions. There was one particular Twitter thread that ended up in starting something new, and he links to that as well. So basically, someone asks that if you do some daily programming in Golang or Ruby is of most interest. He will delve into both and plan to pick one up. What will I end up with? and he recommends that she should pick C, read one source file from OpenBSD, use a source daily. It's fun. Me and another person at TuxBSD have been doing this lately. We could do group reviews. And then the reply to that one is, that would be awesome as hell. I learned best from groups. And so they registered OpenBSD daily on Freenode and offered everyone else to jump into it. So he continues to write in the article, this is still a new thing and the format is not yet solidified. Generally, I make a lot of notes reading code. Instead of slapping it inside a local file, I drop the notes on the IRC channel as I go. Everyone on the channel is encouraged to do the same or share his notes. In this way, he or she can seems feasible. In the first 3 days of the channel, they read the source code of HTT passwd, but lost or didn't grab the log for that one. And the next 3 have links to the full IRC logs, so you can reread how the session went. They learned how HT passwd files are handled in HDBD, read the code of doas, and implemented a new feature in doas. And concluding with, I'm having fun so far. Reading code in a group is proving to be a great way to learn. Feel free to drop by on OpenBSD daily on Freenode. That's a great idea.
It was similar to one we linked to a couple of weeks back where somebody just went through the process of rewriting a small C program from the old 4.4 BSD, but rewriting it from scratch, but describing the process as they did it. And it was a good way to learn as well. But yeah, reading the code for this stuff is a great way to understand the programming language and some of the constructs. I would, when trying to learn, you might want to focus on newer utilities that will have less older, confusing stuff in them. Part of my problem has been some of the programs I've decided I want to work on or fix up are programs that nobody has touched for 20 years. And so some of the code is awfully crusty.
Yeah, but this is actually the area where people will find the most improvements by...
Yes, it's just if you're still very new, you maybe want to read some higher quality examples to start with.
And don't give up if you get stuck or don't understand anything. Just go to the next source file. There's so many around. You might find one that brings you into...
It's interesting how some of them are so much more simple than you would expect. And then some of the simple ones are so much more complex than you would expect.
Yeah, and if you have some small group commenting each other or helping each other out, reading the source, that's a much more easier way to get into the source reading and also making changes to it together. Yeah, and if people have found similar work groups or want to link to those, please send them to us at feedback@bsdnow.tv.
This week's episode of BSD Now is brought to you by IX Systems. When you need the latest and greatest in Intel hardware, you should head over to IX and let them know what you want. In particular, if you can tell them what it is you're trying to do, they can help you pick the best hardware for the job. They have access to pretty much the entire catalog of different things, and they're not afraid to do some custom metalwork to make it all fit.
Yeah, and everything in their storage product base is ZFS-based. So they have ZFS-based storage arrays for enterprise workloads, as well as a full rack of one big machine, the true rack, or small or smaller home server solutions like the FreeNAS Mini, for example.
Yep. Literally everything from the smallest little storage box you can build to entire racks of hyper-converged hardware where you get your compute nodes, your storage nodes, high availability, all that in a nice pre-wired rack.
Yeah, and if you call them up.
They're also a great part of the community. They were just at yet another Linux Fest. They went to Linux Fest Southeast, Southeast Linux Fest, and two of their people had the misfortune of having to miss BSDCan and go to a Linux conference instead. But they did, and they helped spread awareness of FreeBSD and FreeNAS and TrueOS. They were also, IX sponsored that event, and so it was a tremendous time at the event and extremely rewarding engaging with and speaking with the open source community and to speak to people who approached the booth and had questions about FreeNAS and so on.
Yep. And If you are looking for a server solution, then maybe your open source project or any other server, then you should check out ixsystems.com/BSD Now, where you can download a PDF with a server buying guide with instructions or hints what you should ask your other vendors, whether they support certain features. And you quickly might find that IX Systems is the one you might want to pick.
Yep. So next story, becoming a FreeBSD user, find useful tools.
Yeah, this is on bsdmag.org and is basically an article about how you can become a FreeBSD user, finding the right tools, by David KARL. He writes, if you're usually programming on Linux and you consider potential switch to FreeBSD, this article will give you an overview of the possibilities. And that one is structured into subheadings. So we have how to install the dependencies first. It begins with FreeBSD comes with either applications from binary packages or compiled from sources or ports. They are arranged according to software types, programming languages mainly in language or Java specifically for Java, libraries in Devel, web servers in www, and so on. And the main tool for modern FreeBSD version is package, PKG, similar to Debian App Tools suite. Hence, most of the time, if you are looking for a specific application binary, simply type package search and then the application name without necessarily knowing the fully qualified name of the package. It is somehow sufficient. For example, package search PHP 7 will display PHP 7 itself and the modules. Furthermore, PHP 7.0 specific versions and so on. For web development that people might want to do, they basically list the easiest area to migrate to, because they're pretty much or should be operating system agnostic. Most web languages do not use specific platform features. Thus, most of the time, your existing project might just be drop-in use cases. If your language of choice is PHP, you are lucky, as the script language is workable on various operating systems on most Unixes and Windows. In the case of FreeBSD, you have even many different ports of binary package version 5.6 to 7.1. In this case, you may need some specific PHP modules enabled. Luckily, they are available atomically, or if the ports is the way you want to choose, it is in the www PHP 7.0.extensions one. Of course, you can also do developing with Apache or Nginx web servers. All of these are available in the ports and packages as well.
Yep, and they have Python and Django, Ruby on Rails, Golang, Python 2.7 and 3.6, and so on. And then for databases, you can have your regular databases, relational databases like MySQL and Postgres, but also you have NoSQL things like CouchDB, MongoDB, and Cassandra.
Yep, and for low-level development, the BSDs are shipped with C and C++ compilers in the base system. In case of FreeBSD 11.0, it is CLang 3.8.0 in x86 architectures. Otherwise, modern versions of GCC exist for developing with C++ 11. Examples are, of course, available too in Lang GCC version number until GCC 7.0 Devel. Numerous libraries for various topics are also present. Web services, SOAP with GSOAP, through user interfaces with GTK11, Qt4, Qt5, all the usual suspects are in there. Now for Android and mobile development, to be able to do Android development to a certain degree, the Linux's compatibility layer, aka the Linuxolator, needs to be enabled. Also X11 toolkits -SWT and Linux F Fedora 10 GTK2 port packages need to be installed and necessary. The current package is versioned as 3.5.7 and can be solved using symlinks. In worst-case scenario, remember that Beehive or VirtualBox is available and can run any Linux distribution efficiently. And they continue with source control management. FreeBSD comes in base with a version of Subversion. As FreeBSD source is in a Subversion repository, a prefixed svnlite command prevents conflicts with the package and port. Additionally, Git is present, but with the package port system with various options. So that's easy to use. And that one concludes with FreeBSD has made tremendous improvements over the years to fill the gap created by Linux. FreeBSD still maintains his interesting specificities. Hence, there will not be too much blockers if your projects are reasonably sized to allow a migration to FreeBSD. Yeah, that's so for people who are still pondering whether they should switch to FreeBSD or any of the BSDs in particular, they might find that migrating is actually quite easy because you will find many of your ports and software versions that you are used to in the ports and packages as well.
Yeah, for a web server, there's almost nothing that would keep you from moving to FreeBSD very easily.
Yeah, so try it out.
Next one is notes from Project Aeronix, Part 10. So just for people that haven't been following the whole series, including us, this has been almost 2 years since I finished building the machine I named Aeronix, and it was served well during that time. The only thing that ever broke was a CPU fan, which was replaced with the identical one. However, for too long, I've wanted to run OpenBSD on it instead of Debian. So they first experimented with RAID 1 on OpenBSD setup in VirtualBox, plugging in and unplugging drives and learning what OpenBSD's RAID 1 is really smooth. When I finished with that coverage, I copied all the data on 2 drives outside of the Aeronix. One external hard drive I regularly use as a backup, and the second internal drive in the desktop computer. Copying the data took about 2 afternoons. Aeronix usually has a higher temperature, somewhere around 55 to 65 degrees Celsius, depending on time of the year. And when stressed, it gets really high, up was around to 75. During full-speed copying over NFS and to external drives, I went as high as 85 degrees, which made him a bit nervous. After the data was copied, they temporarily unconfigured the computer on the local network to not touch Aeronix, plugged in a keyboard and display, and a OpenBSD 6.1 thumb drive, and installed OpenBSD. So you can see they created the devices, overrode it all with the first megabyte with zeros to get rid of any partition headers and so on. Fdisk the 2 disks, set it all up, then used the BioCTL to configure it as soft RAID. Then once they had installed on it, they could run syspatch to get all up to date. Then they added the soft dependencies and no access time options to improve the performance of their mount points, configured their IP address, disabled root login and password authentication in SSHD, set up doas, set up their mail stuff,
the usual setup.
The tables for SMTP DD, then set up NFS, mounted stuff and copied the files back over using rsync, and then they set up Samba to share the files off the OpenBSD machine, installed OpenVPN and configured that, and it all worked like a charm. They say migrating to OpenBSD was way easier than they anticipated. There are various benefits like more security, a reliable RAID 1 setup, although you never know how well that's working until one of the drive dies, better documentation, and a lot more. However, the true benefit for me is the fact that I like OpenBSD, and it makes me happy to have one more OpenBSD machine and one fewer Linux machine. So what comes next? I really have to learn to configure PF. They also want to set up fully automated backups, more useful daily email reports, set up SyncThing, and possibly upgrade some SSDs in the future.
Okay. So we might see future updates and future parts in that blog post with more information about how that went. Now it's time for a BSD Bits section, starting with running OpenBSD on Azure. So this one is from the bright blue puffy department on the Undeadly Orc articles listing. So the writing is, a new Microsoft Azure blog entry running OpenBSD on Azure describes OpenBSD support. Today we are happy to share that to you that Azure supports OpenBSD 6.1 with the collaboration effort from SDNera and Microsoft. Meanwhile, SDNera brings their firewall product based on OpenBSD on board Azure Marketplace now. is Denera. If you don't know about that company, is Rijk Flöter, and he's been working on integrating that with Microsoft Azure and their own firewall product listed from the article. And the register covers this development. Microsoft Azure adds OpenBSD support. Repeat, Azure adds OpenBSD support. So they were surprised as many other people, I guess. And this results from the efforts of Mike B. at OpenBSD, Rake, JSG, and others.
So this was announced at BSDCan by the Kylie Lang and the other people from Microsoft as well, that in addition to their FreeBSD support, they now also have OpenBSD, and that the first OpenBSD appliance they support is as Denera's firewall product.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is great news, and many people will probably try this out and see how it works for them. Okay, next up is Mon Dieu, portable alternative for FreeBSD update. That sounds interesting. So this is a link on github.com and lists Mon Dieu as a portable alternative for FreeBSD update. With the description, Mon Dieu is a simple replacement for FreeBSD update. It allows you to just upgrade to whatever version of a FreeBSD release you want, as long as you have the releases tarballs. Just like FreeBSD update, it will scan your current file system and build a list of files that differ from the release. After confirming the list, it will be installed and you will get the chance to manually merge your config files. Unlike FreeBSD update, this merging can't be done automatically, lacking a common reference point for both releases. And there's a usage listing and parameters the program takes. There's also some integration with BEADM, the boot environment administration tool. So that seems something worth checking out. And yeah, we have all the other information in the show notes and the link to the Mon Dieu on GitHub.
Yep, might be useful for major version upgrades. Obviously, it doesn't do patching since we don't release tarball sets for the patch ones, but...
Well, we'll never know. It's worth trying out. Yeah, it's worth trying out.
Looking at, in particular, a tool like this for following the snapshots of head rather than the actual releases.
Yeah.
The weekly snapshots, and being able to walk those forward by just extracting base.txt over top and merging the config files. In particular, one way to deal with the config file thing would actually be looking at using etc update. So when you extract the new files, you'll put all the new files from your release tarball in the new directory, and it will have the previous ones from however the system got installed. And then when you do the next update, you just rename the old new to previous and extract the new, and then it'll be able to have, it'll always have the stuff to diff against that way as well.
Ah, that's a good idea.
Mm-hmm. I'll have to take a look at that. I might be just able to write that up in a couple sentences as a PR on that GitHub to explain to them how to solve the problem with the merging of config files.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Our next item is Plan 9-9K, 64-bit Plan 9. That's a link to bitbucket.org and has a README here for us, explaining that this is the source for an experimental 64-bit Plan 9 kernel and supporting software. It features a revised memory management system, MCS spin locks, and other changes to system data structures to support full 64-bit addressing. Changes to the scheduler are also planned to improve support for multi-core. Currently, it supports AMD 64, x86-64, and Intel 64, although parts have to run on other platforms. Use it together with code.google.com/p/plan9 for the source of compilers, libraries, and commands.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. For the Plan 9 folks out there. Would be nice to get a little bit more into that, like maybe finding a review of someone who tried this or is running this maybe in an interesting way. In a future episode, we could cover that.
Possibly. And then we have installing OpenBSD on your laptop is not really that hard. So in this example, they have a Lenovo ThinkPad X200, and they go through the steps of installing installing OpenBSD, connect to the Wi-Fi, set up a package mirror, and install all the packages. Install the XFCE desktop environment, configure their rc.conf to enable the power management and the graphical login, configure DoAs to allow the user to mount their USB stick, configure the XFCE mount plugin so that it can automatically mount and unmount the USB stick, install updates, read some stuff, and optionally how to do it with full disk encryption if you want, or to have scripted Wi-Fi.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a longer article with a little more examples and how the command line utilities will look like.
Yeah, so it mostly focuses on the post-install setup phases, but it's quite interesting.
Mm-hmm. Next up is a sad one. Ubuntu BSD is dead, and even the www.ubuntubsd.org website is not reachable at this point. So apparently that one died a slow but I guess unavoidable death.
Well, I don't know why people keep insisting on trying to mix a very nice BSD kernel with grubby
userland.
Userland, but anyway.
Yeah, that didn't go so well, but yeah, we just want to say at this point it's not available anymore. But it's a good way to migrate to another BSD and a full BSD, userland and kernel and libraries. Maybe OpenSense might be something for you. 17.1.8 has been released, and we have the release notes in the show notes, as always. Starting with, hello again, it is a pleasure that we announced the availability of SafeStack in the OpenSense ports tree as our latest addition via our valued hardened BSD friendship. While SafeStack is already deployed for the base operating systems, it has not previously been applied for the ports tree. SafeStack is an exploit mitigation developed by Clang LLVM. It helps mitigate stack-based buffer overflows, and SafeStack depends on address space layout randomization, also known as ASLR, in order to be effective. OpenSense fulfills that dependency by including the hardened BSD ASLR implementation, which follows the original PAX design. Without ASLR, SafeStack is ineffective, as an attacker would know where the SafeStack lines in memory and could use that information to his or her advantage.
And then in the release notes, they just talk about some of the bugs that were fixed, like IPv6 SSL cipher selection, and allowing you to have more name servers, and some adjustments to adding disable preemption in CARP to the graphical interface and all that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So always good to see more security increases and more hardening of systems. Speaking of security, our sponsor for the feedback and questions section is the also very secure Tarsnap. Go to tarsnap.conf to get your tarsnap.com, and Tarsnap is your online backups for the truly paranoid. If you need to back up your file and you know you need to, you should look at tarsnap.conf.
Yep. Yeah, your files are compressed and deduplicated, then compressed, and then they're encrypted and signed and sent out to the cloud. The key never leaves your computer, and Tarsnap and the people behind it have no access to your data at all. All they get are encrypted blobs. They don't know what's in them. This way, all your data is safe, and with the encryption and the signing, the encryption means that nobody can view your files or get the original versions, and the signing means that when you restore it, you can tell that the file's not been modified in any way.
Mm-hmm.
So they break your, you're going to detect any problems with the backups as well.
Yep. And they provide extensive documentation how to use Tarsnap, but if you know how to use Tar, then you pretty much are set. But for those people who are still learning it, there's also a getting started with Tarsnap link, Tarsnap simple usage and general usage tips. And there's also a full book available by Michael W. Lucas, Tarsnap Mastery, for those who want to get into the latest and more obscure uses of Tarsnap. But in general, right. Tarsnap is very easy.
All it takes to get started is $5. So just put in the $5 and start doing your backups. You'll be thanking us later.
So try out Tarsnap and see whether your files are securely backed up into the cloud, and you can still retrieve them later on. But you're the only person doing that. Okay, our feedback and questions today has 4 people sending us questions. The first one is Patrick about operating system textbooks. So that was the Patrick. We had a couple of shows earlier with the interview from Punkt.de. And he writes, "Hey guys, thanks again for having me on the show. Apart from the fact that I look like that was really fun, and hopefully most people will listen to the audio version anyway." Well, that was okay. I mean, looks are irrelevant at this point. His blog entry about Pixie booting is making progress, and by now it's been released. It's a very good one. ETA in a week or so this has already happened. I hope you will briefly mention and link to it in one of the next episodes. The talk about the Pro server essentially set up for EuroBSDCon was accepted. Yeah, it's in the schedule for EuroBSDCon.
Yep, I look forward to seeing you there.
He found it amusing that you mentioned Andy Tannenbaum's book, since this is what sparked my interest in operating systems in the first place. Just some links for the show notes. There's the edition he learned from in Unix and Minix, and we have that in the link section to that feedback section as well. It has since been superseded by second and third edition, and he links the two books on Amazon. I own the second, and I assume the third is one of equal quality. The only point one might criticize about this book is that, as all textbooks on open systems I know, it draws a way too simplistic picture of the machine. CGNN's brilliant keynote in Belgrade about looking backwards. There's a presentation slide link to that as well. Slide 16, 19, and 20. Another marvelous text, if you're interested in operating systems and Unix history, is this. So that's the Lyons commentary book, linked on Amazon as well.
Yeah, we talked about that one around systems we love and so on, but basically it's one of the original versions of the Unix source code that was public, and you just basically went through and wrote commentary about all of the lines of code, and it was a great way, we've been talking about learning C by reading source code. It's a great way to get started there. It's commentary on all the original Unix source code, kind of explaining what a bunch of it does.
Yep. He wholeheartedly recommends that. And if you finally realize how you are not expected to understand this code works, that feeling of enlightenment and the arcane C is great fun. And last, for all tech history nuts like himself, he has a link to another two Amazon books. You can get them everywhere else. It's just an easier link to use. Quarter Century Unix by Peter Salas and Casting Net, ARPANET, Internet Beyond. I need to open that on Amazon to get the correct title. But those two are, Casting the Net from ARPANET to Internet and Beyond. That will have a lot more technical information about how everything is or evolved as it is today. Yeah, so thank you, Patrick, and we'll see you at EuroBSDCon. Next up is Brian about snapshot retention. Isn't that something we had similarly last show?
Yep, that's a different question.
Okay. He writes, "First, I would like to say I enjoyed the show, and thank you both for continuing to do it." Thanks, Brian. Now to his question. He has two FreeBSD servers running ZFS, with one using send receive to replicate its content to the other. The backup machine currently has more storage, so he would like to store more historic snapshots on it than on the previous storage. When he tries to create additional snapshots on the backup box, they get deleted when the next replication is run, so as they are now found on the primary unit. He's currently taking hourly snapshots that are kept for 48 hours, daily snapshots that are kept for a month, and monthly snapshots that are kept for 3 months. I would like to keep the smoothly snapshots for a year on the backup box, the monthly snapshots. Is it possible to configure things to make this work?
Right, so for that one, it depends on some tooling. So yes, if you create a new snapshot on the backup server, it'll be in the way and you won't be able to replicate any new snapshots from the original server to the backup server. And you can't create a historic snapshot, basically. You can't create a snapshot in the past. So what you want to do is look at the tool you're using to do replication. If it's ZXfer, it has a grandfather option. So by default, it never removes any snapshots from the backup server, meaning that if you take a snapshot, what did you say, how often was it? Every couple hours?
Yep.
Yeah, he's taking hourly snapshots. If you have your replication going and you're never pruning, that would mean that every one of those hourly snapshots will exist on the backup server, which might not be what you want. So likely do something similar to what I do, whereas the tool, when it does the replication, it removes any snapshots on the backup server that have been deleted from the primary server. But that means that eventually you delete those monthlies, and you don't want to. So there's the lowercase g option in ZXfer is grandfather, and you can say, when deleting snapshots, don't ever delete a snapshot that's more than X days old. And if you set that to 30 days or whatever, 29 days, 28 days, that way it will never delete the monthlies. So, you're creating an hourly snapshot, and after 48 hours, you delete most of those, it'll still delete them. But any of them that actually manage to get to be 28 days old, when they get deleted off the source server, you can choose not to delete them off the destination server. The other handy trick is there's ZFS hold. If you do ZFS hold, some tag name, and then the snapshot, it will lock the snapshot and it won't be possible to delete it. Be careful, some of the snapshot rotation tools get confused by this, get the error, and will exit and will not clean up any further snapshots. So, but if you want to make sure that a certain snapshot doesn't get deleted because you really want to keep it around, putting a hold on it will make it, until you do ZFS release and the tag name, it will not be possible to delete that snapshot.
Yep, those snapshots hold are great for this one version you want to keep.
The grandfather option will keep the old snapshot from being deleted. And a hold is a good way to back that up in case, you're still trying to debug the script or whatever.
Yep, and the ZFS man page has more information on how to use them and what they are intended for. Okay, that hopefully answers your question, Brian. The next one is from Randy. He wants to migrate from FreeNAS to FreeBSD. And he writes, I got a FreeNAS Mini a few years ago when I was first discovering the BSDs, and I've been very happy with it. But recently, FreeNAS has started to feel more restrictive than helpful. Sometimes the web interface gets in the way of something I know how to do. In particular, upgrading the OwnCloud plugin jail never works properly, and I have to SSH in and play with Warden before I can find any kind of error message. At that point, it would be easier for me to join and just use FreeBSD. So I'd like to convert the FreeNAS Mini from FreeNAS to FreeBSD in my free time on a free weekend. I think I should be able to simply replace the FreeNAS boot pool with the FreeNAS install and import the data pool. I'll have to set up all the shares, services, and jails, but at least all the data will be there. Is there an easy way to get the OS 11.0 release installed on the data pool rather than being on a separate drive? Keeping them separate feels like having a single point of failure in my RAID array. Is there anything I should be aware of before I do this?
Like your existing data pool from your FreeNAS will nicely just import on a FreeBSD machine. If you want to install your base OS into the existing data pool, that'll be a little more difficult. I forget how the FreeNAS ends up partitioning the disks and how that'll work. Having this separate pool for the OS is somewhat useful. In a FreeNAS, because the settings are actually stored in the data pool, it means that if the drive with the OS on it dies, you just download the latest version of FreeNAS, write it to the USB stick and plug it in and boot, and it'll pick everything back up.
Does 11.0 release have, it should have the boot environment layout.
Right, but it doesn't, like the FreeBSD 11 installer isn't going to offer you the option to install to an existing Z pool. It will want to erase the disks and start over, and that's not what he wants. It'll definitely be easier to do an install onto a separate set of drives or whatever, and then import your data pool. It'd be a bit more of an operation to install the OS onto the existing pool, although it is possible. TrueOS's installer has a nice way to do that, and it might be a good option there. It mostly comes down to how the disk layout is set up on those data disks, how easy it'll be to actually make that into a bootable disk. The FreeNAS makes those disks unbootable on purpose so that it doesn't try to boot off the wrong disk.
Yep, a little safety net. Other than that, pool ports and packages, network config.
Like you should in general be able to even. I'm not sure where it is hidden in there, but somewhere on your data pool there will be the Samba config file that you could actually extract and drop in the right place to have it picked up by FreeBSD, so you don't have to redo all that configuration even. But ZFS is ZFS, so it should be pretty trivial to be able to just import your data pool on any machine that supports ZFS and take over from there.
Yep. And if you have more problems or the migration went well, you might want to report that as well to us, or write a little blog post or something, so we can cover that for other people who might considering same or similar migration. And our last feedback and questions entry for today is from Florian, bootloader resolution. He writes, "Hi guys," he's referencing another feedback we had a couple of shows earlier. "Listener with the black screen and the bootloader may want to try add-in a mode 0 to his loader's config. Fiddling with the FreeBSD 11 memstick image, I've got the initial loader displayed fine in my X220 booting with EFI. But anything the kernel printed afterwards was messed up and unreadable. He used the mode command on the loader's prompt to set the resolution before booting, but the ones higher than mode 0 I've tried didn't work on the loader's prompt to begin with. So if for some reason the bootloader chooses a resolution which can't be displayed by default, setting the lowest one, i.e. mode 0, might help. Kind regards, keep up the good work. And PS, I noticed you're slowly getting used to the higher latency between the hosts." Yeah.
Yes.
That's some feedback we got.
I'm trying not to talk over top of you. It gets difficult sometimes.
Yeah, we need some kind of hidden signal where we kind of blink and then everyone or the other person knows. Yeah, but thanks for the feedback, and maybe that suggestion with the bootloader helped bringing that up and giving you better messages when booting. That's all for this week. And next week we have our 200th episode, which is interesting and exciting.
That's a lot of weeks in a row without ever taking a week off.
Yeah, we're excited, and maybe we'll have something special prepared, so you want to check out that show and see what we have in store for you. Thanks for watching.
We'll keep going and see you in week 201 as well.
Another 200 episodes to go. Okay, thank you. Goodbye.
Yep. See you next week.